$700 billion. 9 bank chief executives in a single Treasury conference room, $125 billion in preferred stock, sold to the federal government before any of them left the building. Paulson, Bernanke, Geithner, the same 3 men who, 6 weeks earlier, had signed an $85 billion credit line to AIG in a single afternoon. Why 9? Why one room? Why preferred stock? Not the toxic assets Paulson had sworn under oath to Congress he would buy? The answer is the largest single peacetime authorization of public money in American history, and a Treasury Secretary who changed his mind in 10 days. On the 3rd of October 2008, President George W. Bush signed the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. 10 days later, Paulson sat at the head of a conference table and informed those 9 banks that they would instead be selling him equity. By close of business. The phrase "too big to fail" had existed for 30 years. On the 13th of October 2008, it became policy. 36 hours had become 27 days. The rule of the rescue had become the policy of the rescue. This is the story of how a 3-page request became a $700 billion program, how it changed shape twice before it spent a dollar, and how a Harvard law professor turned the scandal of its execution into the agency that would regulate every credit card in the country. TARP, October 2008. On the morning of the 29th of September 2008, 13 days after the Fed announced an $85 billion credit line for AIG, Paulson and Bernanke walked into the Speaker's office and asked for $700 billion in 3 typed pages. The bill was 2.5 pages long. Section 8 read that the Secretary's decisions were non-reviewable. No court, no agency, no oversight. The House Republican caucus revolted. The progressive wing of the Democrats revolted. 2 days of phone calls from the President, the Speaker, and the Treasury Secretary failed to recover the lost votes. By Monday afternoon, the whip count had collapsed. At 2:07 p.m. Eastern, the House rejected the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, 228 to 205. 133 Republicans voted no. 95 Democrats voted no. The Dow registered the verdict in real time. By the closing bell, the index had lost 777.68 points, 6.98%, $1.2 trillion erased between the gavel and 4 o'clock. The largest single-day point loss in the history of the index. 4 days earlier, in the White House Cabinet Room, Bush, McCain, Obama, the congressional leadership, all in the same room. Paulson had dropped to one knee and asked Pelosi not to walk away from the deal. Pelosi answered, "I didn't know you were Catholic." 4 days after the House rejected the bill, the Senate passed it. The new version was no longer 3 pages. It was 451. On the 1st of October, the Senate voted 74 to 25. Obama voted yes. McCain voted yes. The bill now carried an oversight panel, an inspector general, executive compensation limits, and mortgage debt relief. Sweeteners drafted to peel off Monday's no votes. On Friday the 3rd, the House reconvened. The market had spent the week pricing in catastrophe. The London interbank rate had broken 9% overnight. Money market funds, for the first time in the post-war era, were posting negative real yields. 58 Republicans and 32 Democrats switched their votes. The House passed the act 263 to 171. President Bush signed it in the Oval Office early Friday afternoon. Title I authorized the Secretary of the Treasury to purchase up to $700 billion of troubled assets. The authority was, by statute, the Secretary's alone. Paulson named a 35-year-old ex-Goldman banker, Neil Kashkari, as interim Assistant Secretary for Financial Stability. An empty third-floor office. No staff. Authority to spend $700 billion before the new administration arrived in January. The largest single peacetime authorization of public money in American history, granted to one man on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after a 3-page draft. The original plan was the plan Paulson had described to Congress under oath. Treasury would run reverse auctions. Banks would submit the toxic mortgage-backed securities on their balance sheets. Treasury would bid against itself for the lowest price. The market finally would have a clearing price for the unsellable. The plan was drafted over the weekend of the 13th of September. The same weekend, Lehman filed for Chapter 11. The acronym was assembled before the policy, Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP. Inside Treasury, the staff understood the problem within days. No reverse auction could simultaneously protect the taxpayer and recapitalize the banks. Pay market price, the banks booked further losses and failed anyway. Overpay, the program was a direct transfer to bank shareholders. By the second week of October, the alternative was being argued in op-eds. George Soros in the Financial Times, Warren Buffett on CNBC. Each dollar of equity injected into a bank could be levered 10 to 1 against new lending. Each dollar spent on toxic assets, levered against nothing. On the 8th of October, the United Kingdom moved first. Chancellor Alistair Darling injected £50 billion of capital into Royal Bank of Scotland, Lloyds, and HBOS. London markets stabilized within 48 hours. Paulson abandoned the plan he had sworn to Congress was the only plan. On the morning of the 13th of October, he summoned the 9 largest banks in the country to Treasury. The reverse auction was dead. The acronym was the only thing that survived. The pivot was made in a room of 6 people over the weekend of the 11th of October. Paulson, Bernanke, Geithner, FDIC Chair Sheila Bair, Comptroller John Dugan, and Kashkari. The mechanism was called the Capital Purchase Program. Treasury would buy non-voting preferred stock in any qualifying bank, and in 9 that would not be permitted to refuse. Dividend, 5% for 5 years, 9% thereafter. Treasury took warrants for common stock equal to 15% of the preferred. The pricing was, by later academic consensus, generous. Buffett had bought $5 billion of Goldman preferred 2 weeks earlier at 10% with at-market warrants. The Treasury terms were roughly half as punitive. Sheila Bair alone objected. She wanted the preferred to convert to common at a discount in any subsequent rescue. She wanted bondholders to take haircuts. She was overruled on both points. The initial allocation was $250 billion. 125 would be deployed on Monday to the 9 banks. The rest would be open to applicants through their regulators. By Friday the 10th, the list was agreed. Citigroup, JPMorgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, State Street, Bank of New York Mellon, Merrill Lynch. Summons by fax Saturday morning. The CEOs were told to be in Washington by Monday afternoon. They were not told why. Meeting set for 3 o'clock Monday, the 13th of October, 3rd floor of the Treasury building. The markets for Columbus Day were closed. 3 o'clock, the 13th of October, 2008, Columbus Day, markets closed. 9 men walked into a 3rd floor conference room at Treasury. None had been told why. Vikram Pandit of Citigroup, Jamie Dimon of JPMorgan Chase, Ken Lewis of Bank of America, Dick Kovacevic of Wells Fargo, Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs, John Mack of Morgan Stanley, Ronald Logue of State Street, Robert Kelly of Bank of New York Mellon, John Thane of Merrill Lynch. Combined assets nearly $9 trillion. Paulson at the head of the table, Bernanke to his right, Geithner to his left, Bair at the foot, a single typed page in front of each CEO. One number, the preferred stock that bank was being required to issue to the United States Treasury that afternoon. Citigroup, $25 billion. JPMorgan, $25. Bank of America, $15, plus 10 more for Merrill Lynch, which Lewis had agreed to acquire the morning Lehman filed. Wells Fargo, $25. Goldman, $10. Morgan Stanley, $10. State Street, $2. BNY Mellon, $3. Total, $125 billion. Paulson told the room the terms were not negotiable. They would sign before they left. The FDIC would, that same day, guarantee $3 trillion of new senior bank debt, but only for participants. Dick Kovacevic of Wells Fargo, The only bank that did not believe it needed capital asked the question, why was Wells Fargo in this room? Paulson, by his own later account, replied that the comptroller would call Mr. Kovacevic on Tuesday to inform him Wells Fargo was undercapitalized. Decline the capital now, accept it under duress tomorrow. Kovacevic signed. By 5:30, all 9 had signed. $125 billion in preferred stock issued to the United States government in 2.5 hours. The CEOs left without speaking to the press. The capital purchase program was, in TARP terms, the easy program. By December 2009, most of the 9 had repaid in full with dividends. The hard programs were the 2 that followed. On the 19th of December 2008, with Congress refusing a Detroit rescue in General Motors hours from missing payroll, Bush invoked TARP to advance $17.4 billion to GM and Chrysler. By April, under Obama, the auto program had grown to roughly $80 billion. Chrysler entered a managed Chapter 11 on the 30th of April. GM followed on the 1st of June. The federal government emerged owning 61% of the new General Motors. By the time Treasury sold its last GM shares in December 2013, the auto programs had lost approximately $9 billion. They had also preserved, by Treasury's estimate, around 1.5 million jobs. The third program failed on a different scale. On the 18th of February 2009, Treasury announced the Home Affordable Modification Program. HAMP was projected to permanently modify the mortgages of 3 to 4 million homeowners facing foreclosure. It relied on voluntary participation by mortgage servicers, the same servicers that earned more from foreclosure fees than from modification. Documentation was lost. Trial modifications were extended for years, then denied. Servicers were paid $1,000 per modification regardless of outcome. By 2016, HAMP had completed roughly 1.4 million permanent modifications. Of the roughly 6 million American homes lost to foreclosure between 2008 and 2014, fewer than 1 in 4 had been saved by the program designed to save them. The clause that survived the 451-page rewrite was Section 125. It created a 5-member congressional oversight panel. The Senate Majority Leader's appointment to chair it was a 59-year-old Harvard Law professor of bankruptcy and consumer credit named Elizabeth Warren. The panel issued 30 monthly reports between November 2008 and April 2011. The January 2009 report calculated that Treasury had paid $1 in preferred stock for an average of 78 cents of value, an effective subsidy of $78 billion on the first $176 billion deployed. Warren's appearances went viral on a young video site called YouTube. Direct, unapologetic, plainly disgusted. By 2010, she was the leading advocate for a single federal agency to regulate every consumer financial product sold in the United States. On the 19th of February 2009, a CNBC reporter named Rick Santelli, broadcasting from the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, delivered a 2-minute monologue against HAMP. He called for a Chicago Tea Party. Within a year, the movement had a name and a thesis. Washington had bailed out the bankers who broke the economy and abandoned the homeowners they had foreclosed on. In November 2010, Democrats lost 63 House seats, the largest single-cycle swing since 1948. The Tea Party freshmen had run, almost without exception, against TARP. 4 months earlier, on the 21st of July 2010, Obama had signed Dodd-Frank. Title X created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Warren was blocked from confirmation as its first director. She ran for the Senate from Massachusetts the following year and won. By the time the program closed in December 2014, Treasury had disbursed approximately $443 billion under TARP. The bank programs returned a modest profit. The auto programs lost $9 billion. The housing programs lost more than $30. Net to the Treasury, TARP was approximately even. What TARP cost was not measured in dollars. No senior Wall Street executive went to prison. Of the roughly 6 million American homes lost to foreclosure, fewer than 1 in 4 was saved by the program designed to save them. The compact between Washington and the American homeowner, that you would not be left behind in the rescue of the bank that held your mortgage, broke on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange on the 19th of February 2009 and has not been rebuilt. Next time on Empires of Money, $6.2 billion in derivatives losses on a single trade in a single office of the largest bank in the United States. 4 years after TARP, the bank Jamie Dimon had told Treasury did not need capital lost more in 1/4 than the State Street bailout. The London whale, JPMorgan, 2012.